I now give the floor to His Excellency, the Foreign Minister, Alain, Claude. No? Yeah. His Foreign Minister, Alain Claude Bilie Inze, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Gabon. Honorable Minister, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Mr. President, it is a particular honor for me, on behalf of the President of the Gabonese Republic, His Excellency Monsieur Ali Bongo Ondimba, to convey my congratulations to President Tijani Mohamed Bondé on his election to the helm of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I wish to assure you of my country's full support as you discharge your mandate in its entirety. I also wish to pay a much-deserved tribute to his predecessor, Madame Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garcés, for the remarkable devotion and dynamism with which she steered our work during the 73rd session. Allow me also to convey my congratulations to the Secretary-General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for the extent and scope of the reforms designed and undertaken in order to render our organization more effective and better able to overcome the challenges facing today's world. Mr. President, this session is being held at a time where the world is enduring the devastating effects of climate change, the devastation wreaked by cyclones Idai and Kenneth in southern Africa, and more recently the devastation wreaked by Hurricane Dorian in Bahamas on the east coast of the United States, to cite but the most recent climate disasters demonstrate or remain wounds in our common memory, and indeed demonstrate the fact that our planet is highly vulnerable to climate change, which is making itself felt as never before, at a time when the people of Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe are struggling to once again get back on their feet following the devastation and trauma caused by devastating natural disasters. Our conscience must be piqued regarding the need to take urgent action to act together and tackle this threat from which no one is spared. In speaking these words, I think particularly of and pay tribute to the former French President, Jacques Chirac, who's just passed. Who's just left us indeed, and often said in such a timely fashion, our planet is burning and we are looking elsewhere. Mr. President, the theme which has titled our discussions is particularly relevant and topical. Indeed, how can we succeed? This is the question we must be asking ourselves. How can we succeed in galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action and inclusion in an international context in which multilateralism is increasingly put on its mettle? We're operating in an international context in which terrorism and violent extremism continue to sow the seeds of death, fear and insecurity in several regions throughout the world. We are operating against a backdrop in which famine, malnutrition, endemic illnesses and social marginalization seek to undermine human dignity and indeed lie in wait to destroy it. We are in an international context characterized by an unprecedented migratory crisis, a crisis which demands that the international community stands shoulder to shoulder as never before in order to provide an inclusive and solidarity-based response to a phenomenon which is jeopardizing every sector of our society. Now more than ever before, the myriad dangers and perils which threaten our civilization call us to action, and as does the inescapable reality that the future of future generations will depend on our ability to take audacious decisions today. President, the theme chosen for this session highlights the fact that we depend on each other, that our fates are inextricably linked, and that we share a common destiny as humankind when it comes to the global threats which cross both national boundaries and class divides. Today, now more than ever before, we are bound to act collectively to reconcile development and sustainable lasting peace and the preservation of the environment for current and future generations. Here I must reaffirm the expectations and needs of governments to see the United Nations respond to the incessant and legitimate appeals issued by the peoples of the world for a lasting, sustainable peace, for justice on a major worldwide scale, and for the worldwide respect of human dignity. Mr. President, 4 years have elapsed since the adoption of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, and that was followed by the signing of the Paris Agreement. We note, however, with regret that the paltry, scant nature of results in terms of the fight against climate change. The results and achievements garnered fall far short of expectations. Worse still, certain people continue to doubt flagrantly and openly the existence of climate change, and they are treading an entirely different path. In the face of this heart-rending observation, we must, without further ado, ensure that our words become action and expedite the implementation of our commitments. Now more than ever before, we must take stock of progress and remaining difficulties. At the same time, we must take stock of new challenges which may require that we adapt our strategies and tailor them to these new needs and challenges. Mr. President, there can be no denying that achieving the SDGs requires more people to rally behind the cause and requires both human and financial resources to be pooled. There needs to be greater involvement of the private sector. Pooling our efforts is more crucial now than ever before, at a time when we're seeing recurrent fluctuations in the price of oil. We're seeing the value of oil fall, and we're seeing plummeting commodity prices, and these have beleaguered economies of oil-producing countries and commodity-producing countries such as Gabon. We depend on oil income, and that fact and that the plummeting oil prices has widened the public deficit and slowed public investment, namely in the social sphere. Namely, I echo the appeal launched by my president from this high rostrum for international solidarity, coordinated endeavours to benefit developing countries so that they can implement the SDGs. Mr. President, commitments towards developing countries must be fulfilled, namely the transfer of clean technologies and the improvement of access to renewable energy, and commitments to ensure the transition of industry from one which pollutes to one which is low in carbon and respects the environment. In light of the above observations, we commend the recent convening of the Climate Action Summit. We are delighted with the enthusiasm seen at this summit and with the scope of the commitments made. They were indeed befitting of our ambitions and our expectations. Now, Mr. President, is the time to move beyond solemn appeals and mere rhetoric to ensure that projects in the pipeline are actually implemented so that we may increasingly protect biodiversity and do so with more rigour. Now, indeed, we need to lend greater visibility and indeed render effective our financing and resource mobilisation strategy to ensure that we can implement our initiatives in support of our lofty ambition. We require support from outside, but of course this support must take into account the unique features and particular needs of each and every state to which it is extended. In this same vein, we must all shoulder our joint but differentiated responsibilities when it comes to nationally determined contributions, and we must establish a governance model which seeks that allows all regions to be placed on an equal footing, but one also which ensures all stakeholders participate so that institutions can be strengthened, namely institutions which protect the environment. Gabon and Gabon's action against climate change is built on a cornerstone itself underpinned by 3 pillars, which are improvement of living standards and the implementation of climate projects whose goal is to protect biodiversity. These bold policy choices are befitting of what's at stake. And indeed, such strategies have earned international recognition. We have been declared the first African country to benefit from international funds to continue our efforts in the fight against deforestation. Mr. President, development cannot be sustainable without peace or stability. However, peace continues to be put to the test in several regions across the world. Recurrent terrorist attacks reveal that no nation is immune to this threat. Therefore, our response to it must be collective. We unequivocally condemn the barbaric acts perpetrated by terrorists, and we reiterate our full support for the countries and peoples that have fallen victim to terrorism. Mr. President, the price of stability or instability caused by terrorism and the acts of terrorism is particularly high for several African countries. They are doomed to devote significant resources to fighting the scourge of terrorism. Terrorism is a phenomenon fueled inter alia by the trade of small arms and the illegal trafficking of fauna and flora. Of course, it's clear that in this fight, we need to tackle the various sources of instability. And in several regions of Africa, good intentions and the kind words of the international community are not enough. Repression also cannot be a solution alone. A global, holistic and solidarity-based approach is crucial if we are, as we should, to tackle the root causes of terrorism. And we must wake up to the fact that terrorism is a threat to us all. We are resolutely committed, shoulder to shoulder with the United Nations, to promote stability and peace, indeed, in the Central African Republic. We note the inclusive nature of the peace agreement signed in Khartoum. It was signed indeed by all parties to the crisis, but beyond that, we must say that a lasting solution to this conflict depends on strengthening state capacity. This is why Gabon calls for the total lifting of the embargo, the weapons embargo, which still beleaguers the Central African Republic. My president has always called for collective action in order to assist the CAR. Therefore, we've always worked to see dialogue take root in hotbeds of tension and to ensure regional partnership. Indeed, the economic community of the Central African states supports us in this ambition. We must find lasting solutions to the problems facing Cameroon, and in this vein we commend the dialogue recently announced by Cameroon. My country denounces the separatist desires harboured by many parties in African states. These desires render fragile the social fabric of our nations, but also distract us as we seek to stride towards development. Gabon, like several oil-producing countries, has been struck head-on by plummeting commodity prices. This is a situation which has ultimately led to an economic slowdown. Against this backdrop, the government has initiated a plethora of measures aiming to once again balance the books and aiming to develop infrastructure and to promote the involvement of the private sector as levers to the diversification and transformation of our economy. Our economic growth plan is aiming to foster lasting and inclusive economic growth, which will be able to bring about a wholesale transformation of our economy and once again stimulate investment. We are delighted at the recent results of the 3-year evaluation of our economic stimulus plan. We have balanced public books and we have controlled expenditure and brought debt under control. Thanks to our return to growth, the government now has the margin for manoeuvre it requires to finance the most urgent investments the most urgent needs for investment my country has, namely the investments in quality education. an ambitious plan for investment in education was indeed announced by the head of state last August. The aim of our economic reforms and our reforms to education is to bring it more in line with the demands and real needs of the labour market. Mr. President, inclusion is a major concern when my country makes policy choices. The President indeed reiterated that inclusion was crucial. In his recent address to the nation, the President said that all sectors of society must get involved in building a stronger and prosperous nation. Ensuring society as a whole rallies behind this cause is indeed the raison d'être for our policy programme seeking to foster equality of opportunities. Indeed, this is the guiding thread of the government's endeavours to bring about more equitable development, and one which brings on board women, young people, persons with disabilities, in order to ensure that no one is left behind. At a time where we're talking about international solidarity and inclusion, I wish once again from this illustrious rostrum to call for the total lifting of the embargo that has beleaguered the government and people of Cuba for several decades. It must be lifted in order to allow this country to, without impediment, achieve SDGs, which are indeed a legitimate aspiration for the peoples of the world. I wish, by way of conclusion, on behalf of my President, to call for a reform to global governance. This reform must ensure that global governance is marked by justice and is reformed in such a way as to ensure there is equitable distribution of responsibilities between the North and the South. Indeed, in building this new global order, Security Council reform is crucial. There needs to be proper representation of the Security Council in accordance with our common position enshrined in the Esselwini Consensus. Such a reform is one we all desire to see and will allow the world to be brought in line with the changing winds of time, but will also allow it to uphold the values which underpin us all, and that is to eradicate the spectre of war and to hold high the standard of peace. In the name of these values, more than 1 billion individuals cannot be left out of the global agenda and have no say in it. Multilateralism must be allowed to prevail if we are to overcome the increasingly complex challenges of our time, which threaten humankind. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Gabon for his statement.